My name is Catherine Johnston. I'm the Executive Director of the San Diego Parks Foundation, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you here this evening. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank everyone who is here this evening. I also would like to thank those who are watching online from home this evening. We have more than 100 people registered online and viewing from home. So thank you all who are at home. And before we start, I want to thank the Library Foundation staff for their extraordinary efforts to make this a hybrid event. We know as we come out of the pandemic, we continue to try to do events this way so everyone can be involved. And as a mother with young kids, I really appreciate the remote option because that's typically the one I would take. So I want to thank library staff for trying to make this event as accessible as possible. Tonight, we are here because we all love San Diego's libraries and parks. Because we love them, we know we have a lot of work due to take care of them. The city faces $250 million in needed repairs to these neighborhood facilities, at least. Tonight is an opportunity to discuss how serious our challenges are, as well as what we can do as a community to start fixing them. So I want to thank you again for being here to be part of this community conversation. Tonight we have a fantastic panel for you, but before we begin tonight's program, we'd like to share a short video.
You can go to one park and you would just think that you were in some fantasy world. Just beautiful, maintained, waterfalls, fountains, programming, everything. And then you go to another park where you're scared to get out of your car.
So the city of San Diego, we have over 400 parks. So we have an awful lot of them. But I'm specifically focusing in on community and neighborhood parks in our city. Many of them are wonderful. But then there's so many that have been left to themselves to decay. They have not had pockets of money to provide improvements. And that's one of the things that we're trying to address with the San Diego Parks Foundation and also with the ballot initiative.
You know, the institution of the library is relevant today because it plays such an important role in workforce development and education and economic development. So it goes beyond books. Really, the library is a central hub for our ability to connect to those things that connect us to the world around us.
Communities that don't have either private donors or active friends groups, it's a much tougher struggle to get sufficient and quality programming at the branches.
It's not like it's going to self-correct on its own. It requires political leadership from our elected leaders to focus and do something about it.
So our ability to be able to invest more heavily into the role that libraries are already playing accelerates the way that the libraries can be at the forefront of that relevancy and serve communities.
Equity to me means fairness, and we're all San Diegans here, and that's why I think it's important that we improve our parks.
I believe build it and they will come. I see it all the time. The moment that you put a program in a park and it is supported by staff and the community, you see the change.
Parks is part of the fabric of our city, of any city. We take them for granted. We do. Public park is just that. It belongs to the public. It belongs to you and me.
We just need to keep putting more money into the things that bring us together and the educational resources that the city has access to provide.
So now we will introduce our panel for this evening. And after, there will be opportunities for the members of the public, both online and in our live audience, to answer questions, ask questions of the panelists. For those of you online, you could do that in the chat. And then for those of you who are present this evening, while you listen to the panel, if you have a question, there's Post-its and pens. Please write your question, raise your hand, and somebody will come take it for you so that you can have your question asked. So now I'd like to introduce our panel. Our first panelist is Michel Anderson. Michel Anderson is chair of the San Diego Parks Foundation, which strives to connect all San Diegans to high-quality parks and support the city's mission to build a world-class, equitable, and inclusive park system. Michel has more than 30 years experience as a business and land use consultant. He specializes in government relations, project management, and public affairs. He also served as an aide at San Diego City Hall and on the board of directors of numerous community-based organizations and nonprofits. He earned his BA from the University of Cincinnati and MBA from the University of San Diego. Fun fact, a passionate traveler, Michel has visited every continent but Antarctica. Welcome, Michel. Next, we have Patrick Stewart, CEO of the San Diego Public Library Foundation, which supports library programs, expansions, services, and capital projects, including the amazing building we are in right now. Previously, Patrick was the executive director of Words Alive, where he helped provide literacy service to more than 5,000 children and families each month. He's also served as executive director of the Atlas Performing Arts Center in Washington, D.C. He earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy from San Diego State University and graduated from Georgetown University School of Public Policy in Washington, D.C. Fun fact about Patrick, he's been to every state except Florida. Patrick. Now we have, I'm honored to introduce our moderator this evening. Lisa Halverstadt from Voice of San Diego is an award-winning journalist and one of San Diego's most well-respected reporters. Many of you know her work. As a senior investigative reporter at Voice of San Diego, she is no stranger to those who follow San Diego civic news. Lisa writes about San Diego city and county governments. In this role, she reports extensively on San Diego's homelessness crisis and other local issues, including libraries and parks. Lisa also is a past president of the San Diego Society of Professional Journalists, where she has been a champion of government transparency and advocate for other local journalists. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. First off, I can't compete with these two on their travels, but I will say Michelle and I should talk because I grew up in Cincinnati. So we're going to have to talk Cincinnati after this. But on to our panel tonight. So obviously the video really helped set the scene a bit about what we're seeing in parks. And many of the folks in this audience or who may be watching on Zoom know that even before the pandemic, there was a feeling that a lot of our parks and libraries weren't really meeting expectations. Maybe, the pool hours, the community center hours, the library hours, we would notice those would be cut back, especially when there were budget cuts. It would seem like that's the first thing to go. And maybe parks didn't always look so nice. Sometimes they looked a little shabby. Well, things have gotten even more difficult during the pandemic, as we all know. The city has been hit with staffing issues, and that has added new challenges and has throttled the reopening, making it harder for pools and libraries to have those same hours that so many of us were accustomed to before. And parks are looking ever shabbier, especially in certain areas. We can certainly see the discrepancies, and we'll talk about that. But tonight we really would like to focus on solutions, talk about the problem and talk about what we can do to try to make improvements for these crucial resources. So I'd like to start by having our panelists give a little bit of a report card. So I'd like to ask Michelle and Patrick how they would grade the state of our city's parks and libraries and why. We'll start with whoever wants to go first.
Well, since I'm holding the microphone, I may as well go first. But before I do, let me thank Lisa for agreeing to moderate this evening's program, and thank all of you here in person for attending. We hope it's informative and enlightening. And of course, I want to thank my fellow partner in crime, Patrick Stewart, for joining me here. What grade would I give San Diego Parks? Well, it depends where in the city you are. If you're in Pacific Highlands Park, in Carmel Mountain, you get an A. You go to Willie Henderson, be less than an A, much greater, less than an A. So it just depends. Some of our parks are diamonds. Balboa Park, known worldwide. So many visitors come and they want to go to the museums or to the zoo. They enjoy Balboa Park. But it has its own revenue source. I attended a groundbreaking ceremony last month down in Otay Mesa, and it was at Riviera del Sol Park. They've been waiting for 20 years to get that park. The ground's been sitting there, no park. So I'm looking forward to being back next year when it opens. Bay Terraces, we had a ribbon cutting there last July. That community had been waiting 20 years for the rec center. Now you can go to Savita Park in Mission Valley. It's just been there a couple years. Give it an A+. Again, it depends what community in San Diego you are as to what grade you give it. Now, whose fault is that? I don't know how much you want me to go into this, Lisa. I could probably talk all evening.
Transparency, right?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't blame the Park and Rec Department. Park and Rec Department is filled with individuals that are fabulous. They're city employees, they work hard, but it's the funding and it's the political leadership that has let our community down. But I think that's changed. I'm sure we'll get to that later in the program.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to take a quick minute before I answer this also to thank all of you for being here, and also to thank the trustees of both the Parks Foundation and the Library Foundation, past and present, who have come out to join us today and who are watching online. The grade. Like Michel's point, I think that we're dealing with a tale of two cities, right? You know, we've got some really wonderful new amenities, and we have neighborhoods who have yet to realize their full library and parks potential. Some of our library buildings are older, smaller, not able to meet community need, and certainly haven't kept up with the growth of the neighborhoods that have grown up around those particular community branches. We have 36 branches, including Central. And of those 36, I would grade them all, and I'd probably give them a C from a facilities perspective, for precisely that reason. Again, we don't have an equitable sort of, you know, group of buildings in our communities, in all of our communities, up and down the coast, up and down inland, and certainly not as we look at some of the communities south of the 8. However, I would take a look at services. The services that the library provides, that the librarians provide, that the department provides is an A, is an A+. I'd say it's an A++ if you can do that. The certainly before the pandemic, and certainly what we've seen in the last year, our librarians in the city of San Diego have done so much with very, very limited resources. They're being pulled in a variety of different directions as social workers and homeless outreach, and you know, they're serving the community in so many different ways, and again, doing it with very limited resources. I would ask, imagine what they can do if we were to fund them accordingly. Imagine what the buildings, the facilities would be able to provide, and imagine the level of service that the librarians would be able to provide if we were able to fund them accordingly. So I would say a C for facilities and an A++ for the type of service that our librarians are able to deliver every day.
So not all around wonderful grades here. One huge thread in both of these responses that stuck out to me was equity. And last year, a new parks master plan was approved by the city council. And one of the goals of that plan was to try to give lower income areas a leg up, and to also prioritize communities that maybe don't have as many park resources. Michel, how confident are you that that parks master plan can really turn the dial on this and improve the situation?
Extremely confident.
Go on.
And the reason I'm so confident is because it took 60 years for a mayor and a council to get it approved and updated. Let me repeat it. It took 60 years for a mayor and city council to update the parks master plan. So that's why I'm so confident, because it demonstrates there's been a huge, drastic, fundamental change in our local leadership here. In the past, when the city had faced budget deficits, budget crunches, there was always libraries and parks in the town. I see the heads nodding, even from those of you at home. Everyone knows what I say is true. It was always parks and libraries that cut. That isn't going to happen anymore. Not with the political will of this mayor and this council. It passed, wasn't unanimously, but it was passed on an 8-to-1 vote last August. And that's going to be a game changer, sports fans. It's going to be a game changer because it'll help to redistribute and put the funds in those communities of concern that for years and years and decades have not received the right type of funding As I mentioned before, there are those parks in those neighborhoods that were well funded. And we had different park standards years ago when the older communities were built. So the newer communities, as they came online, there was adequate funding for those parks. Well, with the passage of the park master plan, we'll be able to redistribute some of that money. So that's why I'm so confident, and that's why I'm so positive.
Well, I'll certainly have to circle back and check on that in a few years, won't I? Patrick, I wanted to ask you about the library master plan that's now at least making its way through the city hall process. It also has really emphasized equity a lot and has concluded, at least in the initial proposal that came out last year, that the city needs to try to build bigger libraries in certain communities, and also needs to try to better tailor those libraries to different neighborhoods. How confident are you in this library master plan process? And what do you see coming down the pike with that?
So to clarify, we just finished the proverbial we, the foundation, the library, and a group of consultants have just finished the phase 1 framework. And so we spent a year, a little more than a year, really researching, digging deep and really researching how libraries are currently being used, being able to take a look at how libraries can and should be used going forward, and looking beyond simply a facility roadmap. We didn't have to wait 60 years. A little more than 20 years ago, the city adopted a library building plan. And this is an opportunity to take a look at strictly bricks and mortar facilities in certain communities, not all the communities, certain communities, and try to figure out a set of priorities based on that building plan. Now, the difference, I think, between the building plan and a larger, more comprehensive master plan touches not only on every building, every library across the city, every single library across the city, every community that uses libraries, how those libraries are being used, and more importantly, the kinds of resources that need to be in those libraries to do exactly what you just said. How are people using libraries? It's not enough to build a building if we don't have a comprehensive understanding of how a particular community is using the tools and the resources in that building. How confident am I? I am fairly confident. We are still walking through the city hall. I am fairly confident. In fact, we are right now at the starting point of the second and final phase of the master plan, which will take a deeper dive into each one of the branches. And one of the things that does give me confidence is the way in which this plan is being developed. And it is being developed not at City Hall for City Hall's sake. It is being developed in the community for library patrons' sake. It's being developed in the community for children, youth, and families, for people who use the libraries to connect online, to use the libraries to get jobs, and the various ways that a community would use them. So what we're doing, we're being very careful to ensure that each one of those communities have the opportunity to provide input. It's their library. It's their community, it's their neighborhood. They are telling us how the plan should be developed. And what we're hearing so far from our elected officials and City Hall is that that's the right way to do it. And we're going to end up with a plan that will look very different than the one 20 years ago, which was facilities only and left out quite a few communities, and certainly didn't take into account community input the way that this plan is doing. So how confident am I? I am, like I said, I'm fairly confident. We haven't had the final draft blessed, but we know that we're moving in the right direction. We know that we're doing this the right way, and we're involving the entire community in order to develop this plan.
So I think we all know that master plans can be very exciting, but they can be really hard to execute if you don't have the money and the people to actually get them done. And we're going to talk about funding a lot here in a moment, but I want to talk about the staffing crisis that we're seeing at the city right now too. So at last check, when I looked at this, both the Park and Recreation Department and the library department had dozens of openings, and that was really affecting the services that you folks in the audience are getting. It really was impacting hours and all sorts of things. I'm curious in this, and just whoever wants to take this one first, if Michelle or Patrick want to take this, what is the understanding of where things stand with staffing right now? Have there been any improvements, and how have these staffing challenges that I talked about been impacting the services that residents see?
How have the staffing challenges been impacting the services that residents see? Dramatically, dramatically. I will say that there are still a small handful of library branches that are not able to open because of a lack of staff. There are programs that haven't been able to get picked up again because of a lack of staff. I will give you a quick stat. Up to a couple of weeks ago, the city had about 1,800 open positions. About 10% of those were in the library. And so that affects everything from the staff that are tutoring young kids after school, the IT staff that manages, again, that very important digital connection that a lot of people look to libraries to use. People being able to get the books from the shelves into the vans and out to the branches work for all of you. And again, and I live in one of these neighborhoods, we have 2 of 3 of our branch libraries in my neighborhood that have been shuttered since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, we are moving in the right direction. The library has been able to identify about 140 positions and 140 potential employees to take some of those positions over. And then part of the budget proposal last year included the opportunity for the library department to eliminate about 250 hourly, low-paid, low hours, hourly employees, which caused a lot of turnover, and it made it very difficult to be able to plan and run programs and, frankly, run branches. And so the library has been able to convert those into benefited, full and part-time benefited positions, represented positions, and consequently, as you can imagine, you're attracting some really fantastic people to join the existing library workforce. But it has been a significant challenge, and for the library system, it has just simply meant branches that aren't open in whole neighborhoods and communities that aren't able to access this vital neighborhood resource.
And the same is true for the Park and Recreation Department, which is one of the largest departments in the city, $150 million budget, 40,000 acres of park assets, over 400 parks we have, 26 miles of beaches, 3 golf courses, 59 rec centers, and all of them are suffering because of the inability for the department to hire people. I just got an email just this morning from Andy Field, who was elated that they just hired another park ranger. Well, they need more recreational leaders. We have sat down, the Parks Foundation have sat down with city staff because we have the ability to raise funds for summer programs for our kids. Let me say that again. We have the money to fund programs for our kids, but the Park and Rec Department, they don't have the employees to be rec leaders at the recreation centers. So there's a real problem there.
That's sobering to hear, isn't it? So even before we dealt with these COVID challenges that we're talking about here, there were complaints from residents and more of the City Hall insider types just about how our parks compare to those elsewhere. And it wasn't always a favorable, and then same could be said as well for libraries. We didn't compare favorably. So I have a question, and again, I'll take whoever wants to go first. Maybe we'll start with Michelle this time. How are San Diego parks and libraries funded in comparison with other cities, and how does that affect what residents see?
That's a difficult question. I mean, we've got a large, some people would argue, the second or third largest urban park system in the nation. Balboa Park, just as an example, that one park, which is our jewel, has an annual budget of about $11 million compared to Central Park in New York, which has a budget of $100 million. So funding is a huge issue. It's a huge problem for our parks. I think, as I've said before, I think that will change as we move forward and we're able to redistribute some of those monies and pots that have just been sitting around our city and other neighborhoods, unable to be used, not because it's because, I should say, because it's not needed in those neighborhoods, but we haven't been able to redistribute those funds. So that's a new area of funding that I'm so excited about because of the passage of the Parks Master Plan. Then there are also development impact fees, which could lead to more funding for parks, as well as potential ballot issues specifically for infrastructure for parks and libraries in the future. So I think the future is bright for the funding. There certainly is a need, and as I mentioned before, there's a political will to ensure that those communities of concern that have been neglected will finally get their rightful funding that they deserve.
So how is the library funded comparably to other like-sized municipalities and library systems across the country? Pretty poorly. The library has consistently, over the course of the last decade and a half, received about 3% of the general fund. While the general fund continues to grow, the population continues to grow. That purchasing power does not grow with it. Right now in the state of California, the San Diego Public Library system is funded at about 65 to 70% of its peers up and down the state. And to get back to, again, the resources, the materials, why we come to libraries. Programs, books, resources, materials are woefully underfunded for the last, again, decade and a half or so. The books and resources materials budget has failed to move until just last year with a new administration and a new city council. We were among the lowest and remain among the lowest. We spent prior to last year, for the last decade and a half, about $1.28 on books, materials, resources, $1.28 per capita in the city of San Diego. Right now we're at $1.64, making a little headway. San Francisco spends $15 per capita. Barstow, Bakersfield, Sacramento, every other major city in California spends more on books, materials, electronic and digital resources per capita than the city of San Diego does. Programs, we have 36 branch libraries, including Central, serving 36 different communities. Imagine the amount of programming that these amazing librarians do on about $200,000 a year. $200,000 a year. That has fluctuated slightly, but that's sort of the through line there. So we're not even talking about investing in facilities and the backlogs of maintenance and making sure that your branch libraries have the capacity to serve your needs. We're just talking on the very basic level. We remain among the lowest funded library system in large municipalities across the country.
So shorter version, we don't compare very well.
Yeah.
So
glad you didn't ask me to grade that one.
Yes. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what we could do about that. I know certainly your groups are eyeing a ballot measure and maybe some additional funding, but let's kind of take it down more to a base level. What is San Diego missing that these other communities have? And what does San Diego need to make sure that there is more money than there is right now?
If you don't mind, I'll just start right. What I think personally, what I think San Diego is missing is vision and the ability to look far enough down the road to want to make big investments, big generational style investments that are going to put us in a very different position 20 years from now than where we are today. I think that what we're missing is the opportunity to think outside of our annual budget to budget year when it comes to ensuring that children, youth, and families have these vital assets, have quality green space, quality parks and rec centers, and quality libraries, and they know that they're going to remain quality and grow with them as families and communities grow. It really does take vision, and it does take thinking of things in the long haul. And I know that that's not always easy politically. And I know that there are a lot of other obstacles and challenges that city officials face. And it's easy for me to sit here as one person, you know, with the lens of one department. But when you look back historically at how we've made investments into these into these crucial neighborhood assets, it hasn't been done from a generational perspective. It hasn't been done through the lens of looking far enough down the road, knowing that 20 years, 30 years, these investments can be, to use the phrase, a real game changer. Then we have to have the wherewithal to be able to do that. And there are opportunities, I think, you know, besides things like ballot initiatives and whatnot, there are opportunities that the state of California, and particularly the city of San Diego, has to be able to invest in these properties.
In terms of parks, I think the most important and fundamental thing that is needed as we go forward is advocacy. I think individuals in their neighborhoods, in the neighborhood in Encanto, around Murray Weidman Park, Cesar Chavez Park down in San Isidro, Mountain View Park, the people in those neighborhoods, Linda Vista, they need to get out and advocate. Advocate to those council members who, each of those neighborhoods that I just mentioned, those council members all voted for the Park Master Plan update. And advocacy will make a huge difference because the money's going to be there. And the next thing that's going to happen as the money becomes loose is that somebody's going to have to make the choice as to what neighborhood gets funded and what neighborhood does not. So advocacy is extremely important. Those parks that I just mentioned are the ones that the San Diego Parks Foundation is trying to help and assist because they've been neglected. And so we have been concentrating on community and neighborhood parks where in communities of concern that have not received the attention that other parks, mainly those north of 8, have received for decades.
So if people advocate and they go out, I'm assuming they would be advocating for more money. So where does that new money potentially come from? I know your groups have talked about a potential ballot measure that could provide some dedicated funding. That would be a partial tax increase. We know that San Diegans aren't always too excited about tax increases. They're kind of rough here. Also, I imagine there might be grants or other opportunities. Can we talk more about that? We'll start with Michel on this one.
Well, yes. The San Diego Parks Foundation, and for those of you that would like to know more about the San Diego Parks Foundation, I'd encourage you to go to sandiegoparksfoundation.org. And you can contribute, you can learn about our mission, you can see who's on the board, you can see the many projects that we've been involved with all over the city. What was the question?
So I was basically asking what funding resources would you potentially want to try to tap to bring more money to parks?
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, well, you did mention the potential for a ballot initiative, and we have hooked our respective organizations together, and we are moving toward a 2-cent parcel tax to present before the voters here in 2024. 2 cents, very paltry, very, very small, very, very modest increase. And we've even capped it, but we can get into more of that in the details in the Q&A session.
I think, what I see is the ability to leverage existing funds so that you have a state that is willing to invest in your library system, your park system. You have a region, you have a city. There are opportunities, for example, where the library department right now is taking a look at a potential grant that would help to refurbish one of their assets, one of the parks and the assets in City Heights. So money comes up, I think that what we've seen, over the course of time, we have a relationship with our federal officials, our federal elected officials. And when we talk about advocating, it's not just advocating at the local level. There is considerable amount of infrastructure money, and I'm not talking just the money that we're talking about now, but imagine, just think of it over the course of the last 20 years. There's considerable amount of infrastructure money that we as citizens of San Diego have the opportunity to advocate for at the state or at the federal level as well. There is the opportunity to invite community members, citizens of San Diego, to invest a small amount of money as well. And this is something that I believe will help show the city and show the region and show the state that we are committed to ensuring that that the parks and libraries are well funded, well maintained, and well operating. The opportunity also exists, I think, to, at some point, there's 9 city departments. And, to Michel's point at the beginning of our conversation here, the libraries and parks have consistently been on the short end of the budget stick. And, if we do a good job advocating to make sure that, one, that doesn't happen, but two, these are 2 vitally important, crucially important neighborhood assets that we need to begin investing in the same way that we're investing in other city departments. It's important to have good streets. It's important to be safe. And it's important to have the kind of assets, the neighborhood assets, that grow with the community, like parks and like libraries. So I think the money is there. We just have to reimagine how we're spending it. And we have to have vision about spending it in the long term. And we need to advocate. We need all of us, everyone here, we need to advocate for this.
Well, certainly we've, I think a lot of us have seen in the past several years that there have been parks added. There also have been new libraries opened, and that's really exciting. But we also hear about the fact that there hasn't been dedicated money for these things, or that maybe also the pot of money hasn't been growing so much. Michel, can you start talking about that?
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting to in terms of the citizens initiative, because it would be dedicated by that we have painstakingly assured, and we will do that with the voters, that money will go only for parks and libraries. Now that, and we've written that in such a way that the monies that are now going to budgets of libraries and parks will not be affected at all. So it's called our maintenance of effort. Smart people, smarter than me, have come up with a language to ensure that is the case. But it would be a dedicated revenue stream for parks and libraries, and that would be a first. So that's a huge move. And we're going to start small. We'll probably, if it passes, should just require 50% plus 1 to pass 2 cents. And we're estimating that it would be about $40 to $45 million of new revenue dedicated just for parks and libraries. So that's significant. And if it passes, say, at 80%, then we'll be kicking ourselves in the rear end, wishing that we had gone with a much larger number. But I think it will also encourage citizens in the future to challenge the electorate here in San Diego to increase the parcel tax just for parks and libraries. And if I just may say, who doesn't like parks? I mean, everybody likes parks, but there's just some parks in our city that have been neglected. And if we have wonderful parks, this is what happens. They're used by the people that live there. They're used by nonprofits. They're used by families for birthday parties. They're used by churches and social organizations, and the community speak those parks back. But you have to make them safe. You have to provide lights. You have to provide parking. You have to make sure that the restrooms are in good order and are clean. You have to make sure that there aren't homeless encampments in those parks. And I'm sure the same applies for the libraries. But one of the things that I have been so fascinated by, as I have come to realize my own personal passion for parks, is the fact that everybody loves them. I haven't found anybody who doesn't like a park yet. Now they may say that I can't go to this park because it's dingy, it's ugly, it's crime infested, too much graffiti, but that's just the point. If we take our parks back and give them to the community, give them to San Diegans, they'll use them, they'll enjoy them, and the people will be in those parks to them.
I just want to add one thing as an example to what Michel just said. September 2019, after years and years of waiting and political wrangling and finding the money and not finding the money and how much private money and how much public money, years of waiting, San Ysidro opened and welcomed to their community a brand new library. The San Ysidro Library, prior to that September 2019, was the oldest library in the system, and was about 3,500 or so square feet. And they would see about 3,000 visits a month. So they opened 2019, the pandemic started March of the following year. In that 5 months, it was almost immediate, 25 to 30,000 visits each month. Community spaces, community rooms being used, kids in there after school, technology spaces being used, entrepreneurial spaces being used. You could find a parking space if you were down there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So to Michel's point, these assets will be used. We need to advocate for them. We need to be able to get the money for them because clearly our neighborhoods and our communities are dying to have these quality spaces.
Well, and there's also more of them. So I do want to address this question. We've asked if anyone in the audience has a question too. So certainly if anybody's got a question, fill out the note card or leave a comment. But I have a question, a pet question of mine. I've been trying to understand, as new libraries and parks have been added, has the city been able to keep up budget and staffing wise with those?
Not as much as would have been liked, and certainly the pandemic, certainly played a key role in losing a lot of staff. But one of the important things to understand that we haven't been able to do, and there are elements of that are evidence in this beautiful building here, is to maintain the maintenance. It's not enough to build a building. It's not enough to build a park if you don't have the tools and resources to maintain it. And so, while yes, there have been we opened up in the last 5 or so years, we opened up a Michel Press Library, San Ysidro, and there are staffing challenges there. Mission Hills was one of the later branches to open after as we've been coming out of the pandemic, precisely because of staffing challenges. But one of the important things to note in the proposal of the ballot initiative, for example, is that this isn't just a building fund, this is an operational fund. So this gives an opportunity for the 2 departments over however many years to take a look at how their staffing is going, how their operations are working, how the digital infrastructure is working, not just the building and the green space, but how those spaces are both maintained and how they're staffed. Those are really important.
And I'm going to pass if Michel wants to respond. We're having some mic issues. So I'm going to pass to you.
Yes, the same is true with finding hirees and employees for the park department. And that has resulted in many of our rec centers being unable to open. And as I mentioned before, we have 59 rec centers. Well, not all of them are open, and they're open because they don't have the funding, they can't find people. In some cases, they do have the funding, but they can find people to work those rec centers. And let me just comment, during the day hours, many of our rec centers are occupied by seniors. I know that because will soon be one, if I'm not already. And then after school, the rec centers, that's where the kids go. So many people think that only kids go to the rec centers, but it's not true. Many of our rec centers are used by our seniors, but there's a problem keeping them all open because of the labor shortage.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. I really appreciate everyone who took the time to tune in, and obviously appreciate both of our panelists for sitting down with us and grading the parks and libraries. Not so great. And I'm going to pass it off to Catherine Johnston to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Why don't we take a moment and give our panelists a round of applause? Again, I want to, before we adjourn, I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the things we talked about tonight, so folks can learn more if they'd like to. So as Michelle mentioned, we've been, the Parks Foundation and the Library Foundation have been working together to put together a strategy for a long-term financing effort through a parcel tax. There is a website on libraries, librariesparksforall.com, where you can go and learn more. Please take an opportunity to visit that if you have more questions. Additionally, as you exit this evening, there are little cards that say, that ask if you'd like to learn more. Somebody will follow up with you and have a longer conversation. Many of you, it's really so great that many of you are here this evening. Many of you have come from, are representing really important institutions and organizations within our community. So we'd love to get you involved. We'd love to share more about our efforts and about what we're trying to accomplish. A little bit about moving forward. So some of you may have read in the paper that we have opened a ballot committee to do some of the preliminary work. We are finishing the language. It will be available on our website very soon, and we will follow up via email when it is finished. Additionally, at the conclusion of this event, we'll send out an email that has information about both our organizations and then information about how you can get involved in this effort. We really want to thank you again for coming this evening. It was so great that we could have this community conversation. It was really wonderful to see many of you in person. It's been a really long time. I think a lot of people, it was hard to get people to come in. People were having a great time outside. I felt bad canceling the fun to come have an important conversation instead of drinking wine outside. But again, I just want to reiterate how thankful we are. Thank you for coming, and we will hopefully see you again soon as we continue this community conversation. Thank you all.